which is the subsoil, and piled on top to make these huge earthwork mounds. So people are constantly asking, how deep did you have to dig to find James Fort? And the answer is, in some places, 12 feet of soil had to be removed because it was underneath an earthwork fort. The other side, you only had a couple of feet because it had been re-landscaped over top of. So majority of where you're sitting at this way is landscaping fill. And then as you get further into the expansion of Jamestown to the east here, you get more of the plaza and that agricultural layer that's still intact. So Bill started 94 looking for James Fort with the idea that the earliest church was listed in the colonist records as being in the middle, or in the midst as they call it, inside of James Fort. Chances are the later churches weren't moved too far from that spot, so he started between the church tower and the river, and very quickly after digging a couple of 10 by 10 foot holes was able to reach a trash pit that was filled in 1610. So had to be from the earliest fort period. 1607 to about 1625 is usually what we define as the time in which James Fort is on the landscape. After that period of time, it's all Jamestown. That's how it's referred to out here. The First General Assembly meets where the Memorial Church is now in 1619, so we've got that commemoration coming up in a couple of years. And also during that period, the first Africans arrived. So for the first time ever since I have been here, the Jamestown Rediscovery Team has been contracted through the National Park Service to actually excavate a piece of land on their property down by the Ambler Mansion, to give you some orientation, a site where the only named African woman actually lived. She was owned by William Pierce, and we are looking for his home to figure out his home and the different time periods in which people added on to his home in later time periods. You can see where ground from a structure like that. That's known as a mud and stud cottage. It's the vernacular architecture of Lincolnshire at the time. There are two guys. One is the carpenter, William Layton. So the two of those guys know how to construct those kinds of buildings because that's what they've grown up with. The thing is, those buildings use very little wood compared to, your clapboard structures and so forth. They're not used to how much timber is here, so they're still building what they know. That would have had mud walls about 2 foot thick and then a thatched roof on top. We're interpreting that one as a barracks because of its location there in the eastern corner. But you can see how it's aligned with the south fort wall. It's parallel to the wall, leaving room for a street. That's part of how we've figured out which of the buildings inside the fort go along and are contemporary with the fort period. This one would be perpendicular to that south wall, the way that we see the alignment for the wall down inside the cellar. And you can see they're digging it right through the orange clay subsoil. That's the natural subsoil at Jamestown Island. It's kind of this orange compact clay. It has a lot of sand in it though. That's why you'll see it cracking along the edges as it dries out. That's another reason we have all these sandbags here. One young man was asking, we keep all these sandbags here so that we can keep the water back every time we have a rain event. Then we cover it with these tarps and then we'll pump the water off when we need to. So that's what's going to be going on this afternoon, a little bit later with the rain coming in. But it preserves these pretty well. After we're done digging this, we'll lay filter cloth down in it, fill it in, and then if we need to go back to it, we can just take a backhoe, strip the topsoil off, and get back down to this level and remove the filter cloth. Now, this building right here is kind of L-shaped, so underneath me there are steps leading down right about here, down into the cellar, and then there are two brick facades that seem to be for ovens. And those ovens are carved into that subsoil, kind of like a little igloo. What they would do in order to use this oven is that they would stick in kindling, fire it up. The inside of the clay would absorb the heat. Then after the kindling kind of burns down, they'd scrape it out onto the floor, and that's what's built up on most of the floor that you see here, is every time they use the oven, they scraped all of that ash onto the floor, and it's built up over time and use. Then they would take a wet cloth on a stick, clean out the bottom of the floor, clean out the rest of the ash, stick in their bread, close it up, and walk away. It's not going to get any hotter than when you originally put the bread in. What we think they're cooking is there's evidence of that on the floor. We've seen some evidence of birds, but mostly fish. And we've got lots of sturgeon scoots, the kind of prehistoric fish with the bony plates, or scoots as they're called. all over this floor. And we would assume that they're kind of crushing up the bones to get them out of the way to gather up the meat to make a kind of sturgeon bread in these ovens. We think that this building is part of a storehouse complex. You've got a storehouse that's not but a few feet that way, kind of where that bench is sitting. We only have a few post holes for that, kind of representing a building similar to that one over there. Where you see the white pipe sticking out is kind of right after it, because with that much food to cook, there's not much reason for a kitchen like this. So that's kind of our working theory on it. We'll move everybody over into the shade next, and I'll talk about this church just behind us. And maybe we better do this one.
Oh, God, that is really exciting.
Like the sand to protect the hole from the rain as it falls.
Your brother, you go with Joanne, okay?
Jack?
Free, and we were moved to that part and to the northern corner of the fort. But once this building was found, they started to find other structures that were very similar in construction to that mud and stud kind of buildings. So we started looking for them all along the fort walls, about 10 feet off, and so we checked out the space where you all are standing, partially in 2012 and then this area in 2009 and 10, looking for another building like that one in this area because we had seen them in other parts of the fort. They also had checked this direction, had not seen any kind of building, but we were moving towards the center, and like I had said earlier, Dr. Kelso, one of the main reasons he was looking for the fort in between the church tower and the river is because there was a document from the Virginia Company records, and the investors kept records of what was going on in the fort, and we have several letters. But they said that the church, this one from 1608, the first substantial church, was in the midst of the fort. So we're still kind of figuring out that, okay, now we know where the middle is. Maybe we'll find some evidence of a building that is the church. So we looked for this structure right here, did not find anything but later burials associated with the south churchyard for this structure over near this church, and then moved this direction and found 3 post holes right at the end that were way bigger than any of the other post holes we had seen on the site. This building right here, for example, the post holes might be 1 to 2 feet or so in diameter, usually circular. These over here were 4 foot by 4 foot in some cases, huge posts, and as we dug down into them, we could tell that they were about 6 feet deep originally, based on how much soil had been lost from the top. So that's a really deep post for a really stately big structure. Same type of as architecture as the mud and stud cottage, but on a much grander scale. So in measuring between those posts, we found that they were in intervals of 12 feet, and we started going that direction, and every 12 feet you hit a post. That almost never happens in archaeology, where you can actually predict, oh, we should have one right here, right here, right here. So we ended up with a structure that was 24 feet by 62 feet in the dimensions, and we got really excited because they actually, one of the few buildings that they listed by the dimensions in their documents was that church, and they listed as being 24 feet by 60. So we already had a building of the right dimensions. It's oriented east-west, as most of the churches generally are. And at the eastern end, we found 4 burials that were all aligned with that church in what would be the chancel. So we had enough evidence to announce that we thought this was the 1608 church. It's the one where Pocahontas and John Rolfe get married, at least the niece of Pocahontas. And we had burials that likely relate to some of those initial leaders who were here, who died between the period of 1608 when this church was constructed and 1616 or 17 when they moved the church from this location to where the church was. So we dug the burials in 2013 to investigate and tell something about the high status of these burials. We found, let's see, the first row, that was the first grave that you see close to the tower. Cross was kind of marking across the site there. His burial was very We found coffin nails, and the coffin nails we were able to map the heads and the points of each of the nails, recreate them in space on a 3D model, and then figure out what shape of coffin that this individual had. And what we found was an anthropomorphic coffin, or body-shaped coffin. So a flat piece of wood here, down the sides, out to the shoulders, and then down towards the feet. Very, very interesting style. High-status individuals over in England have this shaped coffin, including King James I. His coffin is made out of lead, not wood, but still is anthropomorphic. And in looking at this individual's lead levels compared to the Reverend, they were off the charts. That is way, way high status individual. And no grave goods whatsoever, but the age was consistent with one of the early guys who dies here, who is a cousin of Lord Delaware, the first governor who is here. And we think that probably the West family, being as well off and high status as they were, probably had that style of coffin for their family members. This would be Sir Fernando Windman. He would be the first English knight buried on American soil that we've found recorded, and probably dies within a couple of months of being here. He's named as chief of the ordnance and the horse, and that's about all he gets to do for the couple of months that he's alive. So he's buried in the church, and that was in 1610 after the arrival of the governor. The next one that we found also had a coffin, but it was hexagonal in shape. And the most fascinating thing about this individual was he had two grave goods buried with him. One of them was part of a captain's leading staff, the kind of finial that holds up the spear, was found in the grave shaft in the fill. And then right next to his left leg was a little silver box. And it's a low-grade silver, not in very good shape, about 2 inches or so long, hexagonal shaped box that had a slide lid on the top of it. And we started looking at the box. It had some carvings on it. Somebody had scratched into the side what looked like 2 feathers at one end, or chaffs of wheat. The other side had all these geometric patterns and so forth, scratches back and forth across it. The top of the lid had an M scratched into where the slide lid would come across. Our conservator was able to clean off most of the horn silver and corrosion, because the box, when it came out, was as green as the Statue of Liberty, and it's so oxidized with all of the copper mixed into the silver. And he was able to scrape all it off so he could see all the markings, but he could not get underneath the lips of both of where the slide lid came through. So in order to keep from damaging the box, we decided that we would try to use technology to see into it and see if we could tell if there was anything inside. We could already hear that when you turned it a little bit, something was rattling. X-rays had showed there were at least 2 objects in there that were likely made of lead, but we couldn't get a good read on them. So we turned to our friends at the FBI, who have actually helped us a couple of times with some of our historical projects out here. They sent us to a group in Pennsylvania called Microphotonics, who they use to look inside bags, boxes, and so forth to look for bombs and so forth. So they were very happy to help us with something that was a piece of American history and not a bomb. So they went on and did their micro CT scanning. They sent us also to a group at Cornell University who also had another machine that does this micro CT scanning. Way off the charts from when you get your X-ray at the X-ray, and everyone's pretty happy. And then you get into mid-July, and the rain kind of just starts popping up in random areas. That's kind of what happens here. Is even when they start digging wells, they're hitting these aquifers that have pockets of rainwater in them that is good drinkable water. And there's one of the wells right here. You can see there's another one there. They are constantly having to dig new wells, though, because if you don't get the rainwater to replenish the aquifer, the salt water that's missing. In their first well that they dig in the very center of the core, next to that first cellar that I showed you, that is the one that John Smith writes that they dig in 1608, 1609. It's a cellar and a well combination. One colleague calls it a sweller. But at the bottom, they just drop in a barrel and they use that as a reservoir for gathering the water at the level in which the bottom of the cellar would be, so about 5 feet deep in the ground. They talk about river water oozing in and spoiling the water. So they thought that, okay, this brackish water that we have been drinking out here the well's starting to taste like that. So they think that's what's going on. So it spoils after 8 months of use. And what's going on is the population is using up the good, clean, drinkable water, and they're not getting any rainwater to replenish. So when they fill that well in, it's right after the starving time, and they decide to dig a new well. Where do you think they're going to put it? They move it as far as they can get away from the river, but still be in the fort. So where do you see the flagpole in the back there of the fort? Just below that is where they dig their new well, moving it from the center to the back because it had to be here after June 1610. So in looking at the staff, we noticed right away that the spear point had been hammered down into a hook, and the well's here about 15, 16 feet deep. So our idea was that yes, this huge staff wasn't long enough to reach the bottom of the well, but I bet if you put it on a rope and dangled it, you were trying to grab something with the hook.